So, welcome back to Book Club. Today we're going to take a look at the book Who Are Universities For? Remaking Higher Education by Tom Sperlinger, Josie McLellan and Richard Pettigrew. And as you can see, I've already managed to rip the top of the book and I'm absolutely mortified. Essentially, the book's a manifesto for remaking higher education. It presents some of the problems with the current structure of higher education, both in terms of how teaching and learning is put together and its funding, before then moving on to present some ideas for how the system could change. One of the things the book does really nicely is articulates the need for change. At the beginning of chapter 2, we're invited by the authors to imagine us waking up one day to a newspaper headline that reads as follows: "The number of people choosing to study as an undergraduate at university in England has plummeted by 61% in the past 7 years, according to a study published on Wednesday. The report, which was commissioned by ministers, says that the reason for the drop include a tough economic climate, but suggests that the government's decision to triple tuition fees to a maximum of £9,000 has played a decisive part. The report found that those now less likely to attend come from groups that are already underrepresented in higher education." I think we could all agree that if we saw a newspaper headline like that when we woke up, perhaps on the front page of The Guardian or the Daily Mail, depending on your particular political persuasion, then you might well be shocked, might well be surprised, and in some cases maybe even outraged that the government had taken a decision which was going to directly disadvantage some of those groups who are least likely to enter into higher education. Within the book, the authors present this particular extract and then go on to explain that this is exactly what happened to part-time and mature students following the rise of tuition fees to £9,000 a year, and that numbers of mature learners studying part-time have dropped pretty significantly. A large reason, they argue, for that is the current system of higher education. And essentially what this book does very well is argues that the current system isn't fit for purpose for a number of different reasons. The funding model being one, the course structure being another. The book argues that all higher education within the UK is really built for is 18-year-olds that have just completed their A-levels and are more than likely middle class. And that presents a challenge for a number of reasons. Firstly, that there are a number of qualifications out there that deserve equal recognition, and perhaps more importantly, most people in the UK aren't 18 years old and haven't just finished school. So how do we create a higher education system that's open to everyone? The book also suggests that universities have become disengaged with the communities which they are there to perform a civic duty for, and sees this as a real problem that needs addressing. What I really liked about this book, and something that I found particularly refreshing though, was that this book contained a number of interesting and on occasion quite radical ideas about how the system could change to accommodate more mature learners and part-time students. All too often with academic texts or research in different areas of education, then it's the issues or the problems and what's wrong that's focused on, without necessarily any good, innovative, interesting ideas about how we might work to change things. One thing the authors definitely are within the book is ambitious in their scope. What they spend the text arguing for is a complete remodelling of higher education from the ground up in this country, both in terms of the funding structure, the way that courses are put together, and the very idea we hold as people engaged perhaps in the academic community and research about what the purpose of higher education actually is for wider society, not just 18-year-olds who might be accessing university leaving school. Within the book, 4 key areas are identified as ripe for change in this regard, and a lot of the book's recommendations follow the strands of one of these 4 particular points. In order for higher education to become truly inclusive, they argue for change in 4 key areas. These are lifelong learning, so taking a look at when people access university and encouraging a system where learning is conducted throughout people's lives rather than a big chunk at the start and then not revisited again, possibly throughout their entire lives. The second is arguing for more civic engagement, and that actually curriculum models and university funding models should be led by the communities in which they reside, with members of the community and representatives deciding where money on research should be spent and how teaching and learning within their particular modular structure can look. The third point, and something that I think would be amazing, is full participation in higher education. So everybody in the UK having the opportunity to study in higher education if that's something which they choose to do. And this goes hand in hand with their next point, which is open admissions. So it's not an admissions process for university where you aim to increase participation based on select A-level grades or a prerequisite that a student's done an access course. Actually, universities are open to anybody to apply. Now, these 4 things by themselves sound quite radical, and I'm not going to go into too many details of how the authors propose to do this, because I need to give you an excuse to read the book yourself, right? But I found it so refreshing to have an alternative form of higher education presented that was really exciting. And yes, not every single recommendation in the book might be able to be taken on by policymakers right away. However, it's full of ideas about new and different ways that we can do things. And the way that those ideas are presented in the book is really good as well. So a lot of the ideas, whilst spanning out to wider issues relating to policy, government funding, etc., and society at large, are also zoomed back in to individual personal experiences. The authors of the book are heavily involved in a foundation year for the humanities course at Bristol University, and a lot of the examples they use to illustrate either the issues that they've underlined or make a case for why these changes should be made come off the back of individual stories and personal narratives about students that have entered university later in life and have encountered mechanisms within the institution that's made them feel like an outsider or like they don't belong. It's also full of stories about where the course has worked well as well and how the curriculum's aligned to their interest and fostered a desire and an interest in an academic subject which perhaps they wouldn't otherwise have considered. This is another book that maybe cost you about a tenner, and for me what it's allowed me to do is start to think differently about higher education. As somebody that worked in outreach teams attempting to widen access to university for a number of years, I'm guilty myself of getting stuck into the rut of only thinking about HE participation in terms of the 18-year-olds that are coming after A-level exams or BTEC results. Actually, if we're going to be able to achieve a more inclusive higher education system within the UK, the book argues, and I certainly agree with, then how to make higher education accessible to individuals at every stage of their adult life and engage with communities so that higher education institutions are trusted, respected and valuable to the local communities they serve is going to be key. If I was to sum up the book, Who Are Universities For, in 3 words, I think the 3 words that I'd probably use are interesting, innovative, and overall, and something that's really, really valuable, hopeful. What the book does really well is presents alternatives, ways in which things can change for the better if, perhaps, people like me, later on in my career, people like you, who might be teachers at schools, who might be university lecturers, know people that are involved in policy and education, are brave enough to lobby for the steps required to make significant change and significant impact for the lives of not just young people in the UK, but the whole population. In conclusion, give it a read. You won't be disappointed if you do. Next week, I'm going to be concentrating on something which is a little more sociology-y, and aligned to my PhD. It's a book by Diane Ray called Miseducation, so keep an eye out for that. If you hit like and subscribe, then you'll get updated as soon as my new video is released. Also, you can follow me on Twitter or Instagram. It's at EduDetective or EduDetective PhD, depending on your platform of preference. Okay, see you soon.